Hi everyone. Tonight I'd like to talk to you guys about the media and bias. Is the news biased? All the news outlets are biased toward an eye-catching narrative. Media bias is the bias or perceived bias of journalists and news producers within the mass media and the selection of events and stories that are reported and how they are covered. Here are a few examples. NBC editing the 911 tapes to portray George Zimmerman as a race baiter, pushing Barack Obama's narrative that the Benghazi consulate attack was caused by an amateur video. It was reported that terrorists were at fault, not the video. No reporting on the current imprisonment of the video's director as well. Ignoring the consistently bad unemployment numbers, around 7%, since Obama's 2 terms as president of the United States. The term media bias implies a pervasive or widespread bias violating the standards of journalism, rather than the perspective of an individual journalist or article. According to the Media Research Center, the public claimed there was a media bias in favor of Hillary Clinton by a 3-to-1 margin during this past election. There are different types of biases in the media. Bias in the United States occurs when the media systematically emphasizes one particular point of view in a way that violates the standards of professional journalism, such as bias through selection and omission, bias through placement, bias by headline, bias by word choice and tone, bias by photo, captions, and camera angles, bias through use of names and titles, bias through statistics and crowd counts, bias by source control. Those are just a few of the different biases that are in the news media. 77% of those surveyed by the Pew Research Center in the fall of 2016 said the media tend to favor one side, compared with 53% who said so in 1985. Negative views of the press is growing at a rapid pace. The public's assessment of the press has become increasingly negative since the mid-1980s. 2/3 of Americans say reports often are inaccurate, compared to about 1/3 in 1985. 77% say the press shows bias on political and social issues, while 80% say the media are often influenced by powerful people and organizations. Experts say the rise of cable television and the internet has led to more media outlets engaging in partisanship with less regard to accuracy. Watchdog groups are usually nonprofit groups there to look out for us, hopefully, supposedly. They're responsible for critically monitoring the activities of governments, industry, or other organizations and alerting the public when they detect actions that go against the public interest. Also, attempting to find the facts behind both bias reporting and unfounded claims of bias have been founded by some of these watchdog groups. National Council News was one of the original watchdog groups. Formed in 1973 as a nonprofit watchdog organization run by liberal journalist Walter Cronkite, who refused to cooperate. It was intended to combat bias in the news media. It was officially dissolved in 1983, unfortunately. However, it was a major failure as these liberal journalists could no longer agree on how to measure bias. Today's current liberal media bias culture has flourished in part to the National News Council, even though it is no longer functioning. Watchdog journalism informs the public about goings-on in institutions and society, especially in circumstances where a significant portion of the public would demand changes in response. This might involve fact-checking, statements from public officials. A Gallup poll found between 2001 through 2013, the public consistently thought the media was too liberal. According to the Pew Research Center in 2014, Fox News was considered to have more conservatives holding on to traditional values, while CNN viewers were considered liberal, open to new behavior or opinions, and willing to discard traditional values. Conservatives were said to lean towards MSNBC and CNN. There is no solid proof on whether political bias appears in the reporting of MSNBC, Fox News, or CNN. The principles of journalistic codes of ethics are designed as guides through numerous difficulties, such as conflicts of interest, to assist journalists in dealing with ethical dilemmas. The codes provide the journalists with a framework for self-monitoring and self-correction. Journalists in the United States and European countries have led in formulation and adoption of these standards. Codes can be found in news organizations in most countries with freedom of press. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution protects freedom of the press. This amendment is generally understood to prevent the government from interfering with the distribution of information and opinions. Gallup polls taken found nearly half of the journalists surveyed, 47%, were found to be liberal, compared to 22% who described themselves as conservative. Gallup polls taken at the same time found just 18% of the public considered themselves liberal, and 34% of the public said they were conservative. Propaganda is deliberately misleading or deceptive information that is widely publicized in order to promote an idea, policy, or cause. The main point is that the information is deliberately spread so as to sway public opinion in favor of a specific agenda created by those in power. Propaganda uses the media to spread its message containing false information or lies, right out blatant lies, or false or hidden assumptions. In the book, Manufacturing Consent, Herman and Chomsky explained the propaganda model in detail. The model seeks to explain how populations are manipulated and how consent for economic, social, and political policies are manufactured in the public mind due to this propaganda. Their theory concludes that the way in which news is structured through ownership in corporations, funding from advertisers, efforts to discredit the independent media, anti-communist ideology as filters that bias news in favor of United States corporate interest, and the use of official government sources, which creates a constitutional conflict of interest, which acts as propaganda for under-democratic forces. Communication scholars have identified and examined two types of biases in media. The first type, commonly referred to as partisan bias. It involves media reports that are slanted in favor of a particular political party. The second type of media bias is known as structural bias. It implies a pervasive or widespread bias violating the standards of journalism, rather than the perspective of an individual journalist or article. Here are some biased words that express opinions, value judgments, and interpretations, often full of emotion. An opinion can often be identified because the sentence contains biased words. Biased words express opinions, value, judgments, and interpretations. Often, they are full of emotion. Awful, amazing, bad, beautiful, best, and you guys can see the rest there on the slide. We all have options to change the channel, to seek out information. See what other channels are saying. See if they're saying the same thing. See if they're saying something different. The problem is when a media channel is driven by its biases, that it begins to misrepresent reality by distorting the opposition's point of view, producing fake news, and conspiracy theories. In conclusion, it's important that people work on their media literacy skills. Understand how media messages create meaning. As you can see in the slide that I've included. So this is the first step. One of the first steps is working on your media literacy skills. Always seeking what others are reporting and comparing. And document it. You'll be shocked. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a good night.